Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm going to try and get through this video as efficiently as possible, but this is a lot of data I'm about to throw at you. So I got the request, hey, what about Captain Marvel? Captain Marvel's had a bunch of relaunches. Captain Marvel has been a huge property. For Marvel, they've been promoting. It's a huge character, most popular character, everything else. How is it actually done in the sales? And not just how is it done, how does it track all the way back to Brian Reed's run on Miss Marvel? And what I've learned through doing this is there's a lot of misconceptions about the character all around. Some of the things you hear is that Brian Reed's run was very, very strong, sold incredibly well. Some of the things you've heard are that, hey, the title did really well in trades and very successful other places. You've heard that the title has gotten more and more popular with every iteration. You've heard that the movie had no real impact on the sales of Captain Marvel. Pretty much all of that's untrue. So let's get into Captain Marvel. And I want to say on the offset, doing this analysis tests my sanity. There's over 76 pages to go through. So yeah, yikes. All right, so Captain Marvel has had basically 14 years. We're tracking here 8 #1 issues. Now right there, kind of threw up a little bit in my mouth, but that is what Marvel has chosen to do with this series. And there's been a lot of creators on this, everyone from Brian Reed, Kelly Sue DeConnick, to current Kelly Thompson, who's on it now. And basically, they've all gotten a couple cracks. As Brian Reed had 1 run, Kelly Sue DeConnick had 3. We had Margaret Stoll with 2, and Kelly Thompson's writing the current version of Captain Marvel. So how does this all begin? Well, Miss Marvel #1, because Captain Marvel was originally called Miss Marvel, not to be confused with Kamala Khan, the current version. It is 2006, Brian Reed, and basically it was trying to capitalize off of her appearance in the New Avengers, even to the point where it was on the cover. You know, from the New Avengers, it's Miss Marvel. And this book featured a bunch of they had a bunch of, unusual for Marvel a little bit at the time. They had some cover artists that came in to do a lot of the run that were different from the interior art. And this title was heavily tied into other events. It picked up on some threads from House of M. It heavily tied into Civil War. It tied into Secret Invasion. It tied into Dark Reign. It was definitely a book that was very much involved in the Marvel Universe. Almost every single issue included characters that were showing up other places, either heroes or villains. So our title launches at 73,398, which is a very strong debut. Didn't really have a lot going into it. There wasn't an incentive program or anything around this #1 issue. It was pretty much what you see is what you get. And it certainly falls to about 47,000 in issue 2, but it quickly picks back up again as it ties into Civil War. So Civil War gets us to 68,000, almost back to its original number. This was the effect that Civil War tie-ins had on everything. And so you see those 3 issues very, very strong in Brian Reed tying into Civil War. So when Civil War is all said and done, sales almost immediately drop. We get a guest appearance by Rogue. It's down to 37,000, and this is where the book, it's kind of midway through its fall. It does kind of almost bottom out there right around issue 24 at 24,000, and this is, they're doing some stuff with Binary. Again, this is heavily involved in the Marvel, universe and a lot of other characters there. But it starts to clear up a misconception people had. There's this belief that Brian Reed's Miss Marvel run was selling very, very popular. The reality is, it was in the bottom quarter of the books Marvel was producing. Keep in mind, this is 2006, 2008 time frame, and comics were selling more on a regular basis. And this one was toward the bottom of what Marvel did. It was in the bottom, definitely the bottom third, probably the bottom quarter. It does have a boost with Secret Invasion, gets it back up to 40,000. It kind of plateaus around 40,000, again, leading credence to the fact that this book was heavily impacted by other events and always had a little bit of trouble standing on its own. Once Secret Invasion gets over, it's back down to just under 30,000 with the Dark Reign storyline and some things that were going on there. And it winds up at the end at 25,000. So really kind of mid-20s. That's where it was. Again, at the time frame, this was definitely a lower selling Marvel book. So what happens there, again, for some stats, #1, 73,000. Its lowest selling issue was 49 at 21,000. So that was kind of its bottom. And its average issue sales across series was 35,000, roughly. If we look at a trend line, we see a pretty steep curve going from 67.5 down to 21. And basically this gives us a 69% trend decrease, which even despite the tie-ins and the other things that were going on, it still was a pretty sharp decline. It was definitely benefited from other series going on, but this isn't what we would call healthy. You know, keep in mind Marvel's average, about 35% is where Marvel's typically at for their trends. And this was a series that didn't have a bunch of variants and other things kind of spiking up the first issue. This was back when first issue launches actually sold because they were first issues. So we get to volume 2. So Kelly Sue DeConnick comes in, they get a brand new costume, and they immediately go with Earth's Mightiest Hero. And this was in 2012, there was an attempt to get her out of her swimsuit, and we're going to make her a feminist icon. We're going to really kind of promote the fact that she's a big deal. So our first issue launches at 41,000, which is one of the weakest launches. It did have a couple variant covers. There were some other things going on with it. 41,000 was not a strong launch for a comic. And then almost immediately on issue 2, it drops right back down to where it was back for the original run. So it gets right into the mid-20s. It continues to fall from there, ultimately landing by the time we get to issue 17, about a year and a half, at 18,173. So below 20,000, where several of the last issues landed. And so this was not a healthy run. It was not Earth's Mightiest Hero run. So basically, if we look at the highest selling issue, so number 1 at 41,000, and the lowest selling issue is kind of right in the middle, number 11 at 17,743. Average sales of 23,000, which is dismal. So we're definitely into the bottom quarter of what Marvel's selling at this point. But we get a trend line. You see it there. Again, steep curve, 37,000 to 1750, which puts us at a 53% trend decrease, which is a smaller decrease than Brian Reed's run, but it also had a lot smaller to fall. There, you know, when we're going from 37,000 as opposed to, 70, that's less of a fall. There's less room to fall. But undeterred, Marvel says, the key to this is Marvel Now, a brand new number 1 issue, 2014. Let's go again. Again, Kelly Sue DeConnick launching this book. They got some press going with the Mary Sue and some other places, really playing into the Carol core. Here we are at 44,000. So it performs a little bit better, but there is a much higher, we'll get to it way down the line with overships and other things going on. So it was also a bit of a fictionalized number. But once again, you see that by issue 2, we've fallen, like you look at the graph across, no matter what they do for that first issue, it immediately drops right back down. But the difference is it's dropping faster. So it's basically getting to its low point quicker than in the previous version. And this is going to be a recurring theme of every time you relaunch, it drops quicker to its bottom. So it does get a brief blip up as part of what Black Vortex, I think, was a storyline that they were tying into. That gets us to 30,000 copies. That was its brief kind of reemergence back into a high point. But ultimately, it ends once again under 20,000, this time 19,740. All in all, that gives us a pretty similar look to the last one. Average issue sales, 23,000, just under 24,000. And again, a few issues there, all hovering under the 20,000 mark. So not particularly healthy. Well, what comes next? Well, we do have a trend again here, a similar line, 47% trend decrease. So what you're seeing here is the trend decrease is shrinking a little bit, but also it had 15 issues instead of 17. Based on how things were going, it probably would have wound up in about the same place. Probably was a clone of its previous version, which begs the question a little bit, why'd you go through this process again? Now, Marvel, at this point, I'll interject by saying that part of their strategy is say when a title is falling, we basically reset the clock. And that's why they do the number 1 issue and they get the spike of sales and then the slow decrease again. But what you're seeing is the slow decrease isn't as slow. It's an accelerated decrease. And keep in mind, this is a character they're really trying to build up as a really popular, stable, core Marvel character. So doing this way does not build any confidence in the character, something that, I think that, Marvel puzzled a little bit of why retailers weren't jumping on board with Captain Marvel. This is one of the reasons, is because of this decrease. So we get to a brief 4-issue Captain Marvel and the Carol Corps, and this was once again Kelly Sue DeConnick's final series that she did here. And she basically, this was all tied in to Secret Wars. She co-wrote it with Kelly Thompson, who will come into the picture a little bit later. It's a little unclear what Kelly Sue DeConnick did and what Kelly Thompson did. But this is a 4-issue series. It launches, once again, higher as a #1. But then again, everything for Secret Wars launched higher as a #1. It launched, the #1s did better across the board for all series. So even though it's doing better than its previous 2 volumes, it's barely better, and it was in line with what was going on with Marvel at the time. But once again, we get to that issue 2 drop, 3, and 4. And what you'll notice is the #4 issue settles in at 22,106. And what you'll see is in the previous versions that took 6 or 8 issues to get to, this is getting to it in 4 issues. Now, granted, it's limited series as part of Secret Wars, but everything else, it's showing a consistent trend. So, average issue sales, 30,000. Okay, that's not bad. Had again, less issues in order to fully fall. So you're seeing a lot of things happening with 4 comics. Pretty steep trend there, 52% decrease between issue 1 and issue 4. And that's what we've got. So, volume 5. Now, Kelly Sue DeConnick's out. We've got a combo of Tara Butters and Michelle Verzakis, and this comes in at 2016. Hard to believe 4 years ago, and we've still got multiple volumes to go. This relaunched in January 2016 with Carol as the head of a space force. She was going to be leading Alpha Flight as a bold new status quo. Launches, again, we climb every time for our launches. This issue had significant overships and incentives going on with it. 52,000 is where we're at. Falls just like everything else. Same bottom, but again, falling much faster. This series only goes for 10 issues. We have a, basically, here's where it breaks from previous versions. We get to Civil War II, which was a dud across everything Marvel did. But if you remember, if you look back there at the blue, when Brian Reed was doing this comic, the tie-ins to Civil War were getting us well over 60,000 copies. This shows the strength of Civil War II, which is to say no strength. And there we have a brief increase, but the increase is by less than 5,000 units. And the rest of the Civil War II tie-ins just continue to plummet. So 28,000 there, but by the time it ends with issue 10, we're ending tied into Civil War II, of which Carol was one of the 2 major characters in this whole comic. I mean, Captain Marvel was half. I mean, it was her and Iron Man. And so the penultimate, the final climax to her involvement in Civil War II falls under 20,000, which is just sad. There's no better way to put it. It shows the misery of that event and how poor it was overall and kind of where things go. So, highest selling issue is issue 1. Lowest selling issue was at the end. 27,914 was our average issue sales. And a pretty steep trend line, 60% trend decrease. This one was falling very, very rapidly. So Marvel only gave it 10 issues before they decided to relaunch it again. And so when they do relaunch it, they relaunch it in 2016 again by Margaret Stohl. So new writer. And this was, the premise behind this was that Carol is now the most popular hero in the entire world after Civil War II. A status quo that absolutely did not match what the fans thought of things. So our #1 issue gets us pretty much the same place the previous version launched at, which should have been some signs of alarm. This one launched with an issue 0 at 53,000. We get our formal issue 1 falls under 50,000. And then this title just rapidly, so you see the sharp curve, more than any volume before it, this one immediately falls very, very fast down to where we're at, this issue number 9. We're down at 13,000. So we're about to dip under 10,000 for Captain Marvel. Now at this point, Marvel decides to do some funny things and they decide to do legacy branding and they call it issue 125 and they overship the living hell out of this book. They get the sales back up to 41,000 for this legacy issue. They also had some different cover things that they were doing as well to kind of bring people in. We get it back up to 41,000, but as soon as the incentives and the variant covers and the other gimmicks were gone, we get right back down to 13,000. And at the very end of our comic, we're sitting at 11,499. Now, keep in mind, this is a comic that was billing it as the most popular superhero in the world. This is the most popular superhero Marvel's got, and we were down at 11,499. I believe we're well out of the top 100 comics for the month, and this is bad news. No matter how you want to paint it, this is showing that the power of this character and the Carol Corps and everything is not enough to kind of really bring this issue home. So, the lowest selling issue 129 or 14, which was our final issue, average sales 23,000. So despite the fact that we had two big, a number 0, a number 1, and a big incentive push legacy cover, we're still under 25,000 as our average issue sales, which is just awful. There's no better way to put it, especially given this character just came out of a major event of which she was the main character. So if we look at a trend, we go from 52,000 down to 11,000, which gives us a 79% trend decrease. Again, Marvel's average 35%. This is a complete and absolute free fall. However, during this period, somebody at Marvel Cinematic Universe decides a movie would be a good idea with this character. So we get ready for the movie, and we kind of rebrand and relaunch Captain Marvel again with a 5-part Life of Captain Marvel, which is going to redefine her origin. This whole series, this 5-issue series here in 2018, was really designed to give a nice trade paperback that could be sold in places along with the movie. And so thematically, it was Captain Marvel kind of rediscovering part of her past, which was meant to kind of loosely, if you kind of cross your eyes a little bit, connect into what they were doing with the movie. There was some shenanigans with the Kree. That was the point here. So our first issue gives us 74,298 copies. Once again, heavily pushed. We had Joe Quesada doing artwork for this, and there were lots of variant covers, lots of things going on. It falls, but at this point, we'll get to it in a minute, the marketing for the movie is happening. Marvel is really pushing this series, is very, very important. We do get down, by the time we get to the end, to 27,000 copies, but this is a marked improvement over what we've seen pretty much since the original. So that's good news, but still a pretty sharp decline. 74,000 for number 1, 27,000 for issue 5. Average issue sales, though, 38,188, not bad. We get into a trend, again, pretty steep cliff there, 63% trend decrease. However, that number 1 issue was very artificially boosted. So, you gotta take it with a grain of salt there. Finally, and I can't tell you how glad I am to be saying finally, we're at volume 8, which is Captain Marvel number 1, 2019. Kelly Thompson, who we heard from earlier, comes back into the picture. The goal was to support Captain Marvel's movie, which is going to come out during this run, and also create a nice integrated, status quo where everything is going to be pretty nice and unified. So our first issue, we had to actually adjust the chart. You may notice that everything kind of fell a little bit because our first issue sells 133,000 copies. Now, once again, tons and tons of variant covers. Incentive program. Weirdly, there were some overships on this as well for no apparent reason, giving it to number 1. But 133,000 copies. We fall immediately on issue 2 down to 37,000. So we shed almost 100,000 copies from issue 1 to issue 2. And the series kind of bumps along, although it's definitely doing better than previous versions. And what you see, you briefly spike up to 62,000 for a storyline in which Captain Marvel turns evil, gets a goth costume and murders the Avengers. That gets some interest. Again, there were at this point, they're pushing a lot of overships and they're pushing a lot of incentive programs around here. Our last date we have here is in March. This is 43,734 copies for issue 16. And it's basically this conclusion to Carol murders the Avengers. So all good stuff. But in general, this series is performing well. Average issue sales, 40,593. Now Captain Marvel's probably in the bottom 50% of Marvel's titles. Well, no, actually, probably somewhere around the middle. It's definitely not one of their top selling comics, but it's no longer in the bottom quarter. So, it's doing okay. But one very big difference in this line is that Captain Marvel's interacting with more main Marvel heroes, more recognizable people fighting real Marvel villains. The Avengers show up to be in the book. This is something that for the majority of her solo runs, with the exception of Brian Reed's, they were avoiding. They were sending Carol off into space. They were having her meet cats and alien races and just kind of vague nonsense that actually didn't integrate her into the Marvel universe, a universe where they were really trying to explain that she was the most popular character there. So it was very, very mixed message, weird message from Marvel. But I do think there is a lesson here that if you're going to have this character set in a Marvel universe, you need to involve the Marvel universe. And so that's kind of what they did. You see a trend. You see for the first time a bit of a trend and then a bump back up as we go from 128 to 30,000. This is a 77 trend decrease. However, I'll do this for this series, which I didn't do for the others, because there was so much overships and other stuff. Let's see what the trend looks like from issue number 2. So issue number 2 to 16, much healthier, 14% trend decrease. This is what Marvel wants to see. You might say, hey, why didn't you do this for everything else? Actually, if you look at just the curves, look at how everything is declining for the pink, the yellow, the purple, the orange, and the green. The trend would have been still pretty brutal on those series. But this one, we see it a lot more level and even heading up a little bit. Okay, so just a few more things to shoot out here for you, if I haven't completely lost my sanity yet. First off, here's just a quick glimpse at the #1 issues each time. You'll see that what Marvel did by the time you get to the 3rd volume and on, where they start really pumping up kind of incentive programs and variant covers and other things, the sales do climb. My apologies for the purple number being there kind of lower than it should be, just visually, but because 47,000 is better than 44, but you run out of space. But anyway, this is kind of an interesting dip of how the character has progressed over the last 10 years or so. This right here is a glimpse of the overship. So this is when they overshipped the comic. Now, I want to say here that they have overshipped more than this. We don't always know. This is what we have on record for when they overshipped the book. And you'll see there was quite a bit of that. And then here we see there's an incentive program. And once again, I can almost guarantee there's incentive programs I missed. The weirdest one was when you do an overship and an incentive program where basically you tell retailers you have to order a certain number of this comic in order to get a variant cover for a different comic. And you go, oh, okay, you know, and then you go through that whole process and then you wind up overshipping that comic as well anyway. It's crazy. It's Marvel really wanting to get this product out to the stores. And then last, I wanted to just point out, just from a timeline perspective, the impact of the movie. There's clear evidence that the movie helped push sales of the comic, but it's not necessarily the movie itself. It's the fact that the character was suddenly being pushed and promoted more and in the public consciousness more. So there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that the movie, the actual content of the movie, did much for the comic. But the fact that Disney and Marvel were starting to do a lot more with Captain Marvel, you're seeing that character appear other places, that seemed to have an impact on the titles. And I think you can make a strong case that helped keep the comic basically around 30,000 as opposed to dropping below 20, which was what it had been doing. So now let's look at some quick numbers. I'm going to put this all up on the screen at once because it's worth noting. The best-selling issue you see across the line. Basically, you see that Brian Reed's run does hold up for sure, and the last two that heavily benefited from both the movie and marketing did better. You really see that Kelly Sue DeConnick run sucked in terms of sales. It did not move the needle anywhere. The lowest selling issue is interesting. You see where this is the bottom for the series. And what's interesting is you've got 4 out of the 8 launches were under 20,000. And then just 2. I mean, if you go under 25,000, only two of these actually kept its title above 25,000, which is pretty nuts. Average issue sales, once again, I think this paints an interesting picture. You definitely see that, again, Kelly Sue DeConnick's first 2 runs just did not do well. Keep in mind, this is a run that a lot of people cited as being the impetus behind the movie and where the Carol Corps all came in. Just shows that buying power of that Carol Corps is not really, it's not worth as much as the noise. I'll put it that way. So, and then you see some strength. The sales trend is, again, it's interesting. You see how some of these things progress over time. It's an interesting picture. So what are some key takeaways? Because I'm exhausted. The relaunches, basically, as I said, every time they relaunched this, it fell down to its lowest base faster. each time. The relaunch strategy is a failure. It's hard to make an argument against that. It's, when you see this acceleration of titles selling less, that's not healthy. And it's really not healthy from a public perception period when you're calling your character super popular. We'll get to that more in a minute. Much of the strength of the later launches were heavily influenced by incentive programs and overshipments. If you take out the amount of overships they did, and in some cases they're doing 300% of initial order, then those numbers look a lot worse. The use of more Marvel characters and villains, that absolutely had an impact. We saw it in Brian Reed's run with Civil War and Secret Invasion. We're seeing it in Kelly Thompson's run with the Avengers and other things. Use Marvel characters, get more sales. Have Captain Marvel flying around space, meeting random aliens and collecting cats, doesn't do as well. And then finally, I think the biggest point to kind of pull out of here is you can't just tell people a character is the most popular. That doesn't make it so. And I think there's no real clear way to track it in this chart. But the more you say, she's the most popular, she's the best, this is the most popular, the more you do that, I think people seem to naturally want to resist it. Even if they kind of like the character, they don't like being told, this is the character who you're going to love, this is the character that is the best. People don't like that. And they will rebel against it. And I think they did. So, as a strategy, I think if you're going to throw that kind of label around, this is the best comic in the world, make sure that it is, or that it's not hovering around 20,000 copies sold. It's not in the bottom quarter of your line. You lose credibility, and it doesn't do anything for the book. You can plaster that label on it. It did not help the sales. Anyway, there you go. 8 launches in basically 16 years here, 14 years, sorry. 14 years, 8 relaunches, and undoubtedly we're headed for another Captain Marvel relaunch. We hear in 2021, Marvel's going to do their rebirth thing, and I think there's a safe money on a brand new Captain Marvel #1 this year. I mean, it just feels very, very certain. We'll see. But I hope this was helpful to you. I tested my sanity to no end to do this. So I hope you got some value out of it. I think it tells a very interesting story of a comic over time, relaunch strategy, how it all plays in. Oh, I said I was going to mention trades. I do not have a graph for trades. Basically, the trades were nothing, absolutely nothing special. They were not ever Marvel's top selling trade. They didn't hit #1. It didn't do any more than any other trade. The only difference to that is the Life of Captain Marvel. That had a lot more pickup in places like Amazon and other booksellers where, again, Marvel built that in order to tie into the movie, and it was relatively successful in that's regard. But basically the trade, no, there's no evidence at all that trades were magically stronger for Captain Marvel. So there you have it. What do you think? Give me a like. For God's sake, give me a like for this one. I mean, this was labor here, some pain to go through all these comics, but still, sometimes taking a look at the bigger picture is helpful. And I'm going to now do a couple shorter series just to preserve my own sanity and time, and not put you guys through 30-minute videos. Anyway, like, subscribe, follow me on social media, send me an email, let me know what you think. Most importantly, of course, thanks for listening.